Okay, good morning, students. Today we'll complete 4 systems, that is the skeletal muscle system, the peripheral nervous system, the soft tissue tumors, and the skin. And all of these are miscellaneous topics in pathology in which very minimal is there to learn. And I will mention to you in some short notes may be asked or in some objective questions may be asked. So we'll start with the skeletal muscle system. So the normal skeletal muscle development and function critically depend on a tight integration with the central and the peripheral nervous systems. So this principal element of this integrated system is called the motor unit. So this motor unit is something which you have read in physiology, neurophysiology, and this is the picture to show you that motor nerve cells are there in the gray zone of the brain, gray area of the brain. And these are the upper motor neurons which communicate through the midbrain into the pons, into the medulla, and into the spinal cord. And these are the lower motor neurons. Then from the spinal cord, you know that there are these axons which go and terminate on the skeletal muscle. So these are the neuromuscular junctions. So this is basically the motor unit. So diseases which affect the skeletal muscle can involve any portion of this motor unit. And there are many diseases. The disorders can be neurogenic changes or myofiber atrophy, muscular dystrophy. This muscular dystrophy is the one which I'll be talking about, which is important as far as pathology is concerned. There are other diseases which can affect the skeletal muscles, maybe congenital, toxic, infectious myopathies, disorders of the neuromuscular junction like myasthenia gravis, which you have read before in autoimmune diseases, and primary skeletal muscle tumors also can happen. So today we're just going to concentrate on the muscular dystrophies. So muscular dystrophies, they are a heterogeneous group of diseases. They are inherited and they occur in childhood usually. In this, the patient usually presents with progressive degeneration of muscle fibers, leading to muscle weakness and wasting, because the muscle fibers are replaced by fibrofatty tissue. So there are 2 diseases which are important under muscular dystrophies, and both of them are X-linked. These are X-linked Duchenne muscular dystrophy and X-linked Becker muscular dystrophy. So in both of this, the problem is at the dystrophin gene, which is XP21. So this is a question which usually comes as an objective question, dystrophin gene. And another important thing which you should remember is in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, it is a defective synthesis of this gene. That is, it's a quantitative defect. The gene, if it is there, will be normal. However, the synthesis is usually reduced. A defective synthesis. But in Becker's, it may be mutated or abnormal forms. That is a qualitative defect of the dystrophin gene. So remember, this can come as an objective question. So in X-linked Duchenne Becker muscular dystrophy, these are the 2 types of muscular dystrophies. Both are because of the dystrophin gene. It is situated at XP21. In Duchenne's, it is a quantitative defect, that is because of defective synthesis. And in Becker's, it is a mutated form or an abnormal form of the dystrophin gene. And Duchenne's are more common and they are more severe than Becker's. So clinical features in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, they are usually normal at birth, and early motor milestones are also met on time. It is only when the child starts to walk you will notice that the child is extremely clumsy, keeps falling down, or the walking per se might be delayed. So this is really because of weakness which begins in the pelvic girdle muscles, and then this extends to the shoulder girdle. And like in the previous slide I had said, the skeletal muscle gets replaced by fibrofatty tissue. So you'll find that the muscles are enlarged, but they are enlarged because of fat. And so weakness sets in. And this is known as pseudo-hypertrophy. When there is enlargement of the calf muscles because of the replacement of the skeletal muscle by the fibrofatty tissue, it is known as pseudo-hypertrophy. And many of these patients, as they grow older, by the time they reach the early childhood, they start to have a problem with respiratory insufficiency because the diaphragmatic muscle may be involved. it starts being replaced by fatty tissue. So respiratory insufficiency, when there is not proper respiratory movement, pulmonary infection is probable in such cases, and it may lead to cardiac decompensation, heart failure, or arrhythmias. So this is a picture showing you two brothers, 5 and 8-year-old boys, and these boys show compensatory postural adjustments. You can see that there is, like when they stand also, the feet are a little bit apart because they are trying to balance themselves. And then there is accentuated lumbar lordosis. As you can see, as it's growing older, this lumbar lordosis is getting accentuated. The abdomen is protruded in front. And if you notice here, something pointing here, this is known as the winging of the scapula. Okay, and this winging of scapula is characteristic because of the wasting of the muscles around it. So the wing of the scapula is popping out like this. This is known as winging of scapula, which happens in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And another thing is the calf muscles. They look as if they are hypertrophy, but it's actually because the skeletal muscle is replaced by fibrofatty tissue, and this is known as pseudo-hypertrophy of the calf muscles. So I hope you got it. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is because of defective synthesis of the dystrophin gene, which is situated at XP21, and they are normal at birth, but early motor milestones will be normal. However, as they start to walk, then the problem is seen, and they start to be very clumsy, they start to fall down, and then gradually as they grow up, they have postural adjustments. The broadening of stance will be there. That means they keep their feet apart to balance themselves. Excessive lumbar lordosis, protrusion of the abdomen, and winging of the scapula with pseudo-hypertrophy of the calf muscles. So these are the features of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Now when such patients come, we have to do a skeletal muscle biopsy. And this is a normal histology of the skeletal muscle. What you can see is this is the endomysium, perimysium, endomysium, and these are the skeletal muscle fibers. This is the blood vessel here, this is another blood vessel here. So these skeletal muscle fibers normally are polygonal in shape. They are normally polygonal in shape, and a very mild variation in size is there in normal skeletal muscle fibers. However, in patients with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, you can see that they have lost their polygonal shape and these muscle fibers have become rounded. And you can see some of them are extremely small, some of them are very big, some of them are in between and rounded. So there's a marked variation in the muscle fiber size. There's a loss of the polygonal shape of the muscles. There are degenerative changes, that means fiber splitting. Like you can see, these three look like they can fit into each other because they have split. It's like a puzzle piece. Okay. Regeneration, that means usually, normally in a skeletal muscle fiber, you'll notice that, excuse me, these nuclei are always at the periphery. They're extremely small and they're always at the periphery. But if you look here, if they are at the periphery also, the nuclei become very large. This is nuclear enlargement, but most of the time you'll find that this nucleus shifts into the center. They are large and they can shift into the center of the muscle fiber. So these are signs of regeneration when there is nuclear enlargement and presence of nucleolus. Connective tissue is increased. This is very important. Like I said, the skeletal muscle gets replaced by fibrofatty tissue. So in that case, I don't have a picture here, but you will find that the skeletal muscle here and the rest of the tissue will be just connective tissue. Okay, so there is extensive fiber loss and adipose tissue infiltration will be there. And even in cardiac muscle, there can be changes in cardiac muscle in both Duchenne's and Becker's, and leading to fiber hypertrophy and interstitial fibrosis. This is a Western blot analysis of the skeletal muscle. We're looking for the dystrophin gene. And you can see that normally this is the dystrophin gene, which is this dark line here. In Becker's, it is not normal because the dystrophin gene is there, but it is mutated, so it is occurring a little bit lower. And in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, the dystrophin gene is not even detected because there is defective synthesis. Okay, so these are the biopsy findings: marked variation in muscle fiber size, degenerative and regenerative changes, meaning that there can be nuclear enlargement with fiber splitting. Connective tissue is increased. These points which I have marked, bold, you please remember this much, it is more than enough. Marked variation in muscle fiber size, degenerative, regenerative changes, and connective tissue increased. Okay, so these are the points you should remember on microscopy. And then definitive diagnosis is by staining for dystrophin. We can even stain on the tissue by immunohistochemistry. We have now immunohistochemistry for dystrophin protein, and we can stain on the tissue. So if the tissue does not take up any stain, then it means there is defective synthesis of the dystrophin gene, and that means it is a Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And like I said, in pathology, most of the times the histology is not the answer, it is the correlation with the clinical which gives us the answer, because you can see here I have put both Duchenne's and Becker's. So histologically we cannot really differentiate between Duchenne's and Becker's. It is at the level of immunohistochemistry, and it is the level of Western blot analysis in which we can actually show that there is presence of abnormal dystrophin or there is absence of dystrophin altogether. Then only we can actually give a diagnosis of Duchenne's versus Becker's. Okay? So how does the inheritance happen? It's just like hemophilia. 2/3 are familial. This is the mother with a defective X chromosome. This is a normal father. And out of 4% chance, that is 25% chance that a daughter will carry the defective gene and become a faulty carrier, or a daughter may be absolutely normal, getting the normal X's from the parents. A son may be affected, getting the abnormal X from the mother, or a son may be absolutely normal, getting the good X from the mother. Okay, so this is just like hemophilia ka inheritance. So what is the difference with Becker's clinically? Clinically, Becker's muscular dystrophy, they develop symptoms at a later age compared to Duchenne's, and the onset is in later childhood or adolescence. They are slower. We remember Duchenne's is much more severe. Okay, so in Becker's it is slower, it's more variable rate of progression. Cardiac disease, however, is frequently seen, but many have a nearly normal lifespan. So this is very important, the difference between Duchenne's and Becker's. So objective questions which will come can be on the dystrophin gene. You have to tell the difference between Duchenne's and Becker's, at least 2 to 3 differences. And the first difference is the dystrophin gene. One is defective synthesis, the other is mutation. Okay? And then of course, clinically, you can mention that Duchenne's presents earlier, Becker's presents later, and Duchenne's is much more severe. Becker's may have a normal lifespan. Okay, so these 3 differences you can mention. Now coming to soft tissue tumors. Soft tissue refers to anything which is non-epithelial, other than bone, cartilage, CNS, hematopoietic, and lymphoid tissues. Okay, so they are classified according to the tissue type. It may be a fat, it may be fibrous tissue, it may be neurovascular tissue, it may be smooth muscle, skeletal muscle. And again, soft tissue tumors may be benign, may be malignant. And most of the soft tissue tumors, 100:1 ratio is 100 is benign. For every 1 malignancy, there are 100 benign soft tissue tumors. So looking at this picture, you can see this is a very well circumscribed growth, which appears extremely superficial. What you can appreciate here is that the skin over this is totally atrophied. It's not ulcerated yet, but it is bound to ulcerate because the skin has become so thin and atrophied. And you can see that it's extremely red. Okay, so this looks like a benign vascular tumor. When a vascular tumor usually appears red like this with a very atrophied, shiny, atrophied skin overlying it. Okay, so this, if you feel it, the temperature will be quite warm because it is filled with capillaries which are soaking up the warm blood. Okay, so this can be a benign vascular tumor. Whereas here, you can appreciate that, I hope you can see that this is the upper arm. Okay, this is the face of the person. This is the upper arm from the humerus. And you can appreciate that there's a huge mass here. And this mass doesn't look very well circumscribed. You can see the edges are quite diffuse. The skin is, yes, out here the skin is a little bit shiny because it's atrophied and there are congested blood vessels. Okay, here the whole thing is red, but this is because of the blood vessels which are stretched out, the veins which are stretched out. Okay, so it's a large mass. Looking at this, one look at this, you will think it is a malignant soft tissue tumor, or it could be a bone tumor. And to differentiate that, we can do an X-ray to see whether the underlying bone is normal. So that is the first thing. When you get such a case in the OPD, you have a huge mass here in the upper humerus, and you are the one seeing the case. Usually the clinician will say send it for fine needle aspiration cytology so that we get the diagnosis outright. But the fact remains that if you do send this to a pathologist for doing FNAC, we will want to know the X-ray because it could be a bone tumor. Okay, and for a bone tumor, we need to use a different gauge of needle. For bone tumors, we use a larger gauge. For soft tissue tumors, we use a finer gauge. And in this case, it does look as if the soft tissue, underlying soft tissue, appears a bit vascular. So if you use a large gauge needle, you might only get blood and you won't get the diagnostic material and you will not be able to diagnose and tell the clinician what it is. So it is important in this case to do an X-ray to rule out the involvement of the underlying bone or the humerus in this case. Now coming to the most common soft tissue tumor is a lipoma. It's a benign tumor of the fat. It is solitary usually, but it may be multiple, and when it is multiple, it is usually associated with autosomal dominant syndromes. And this is a very common site for a lipoma, which is there at the waist level, okay? And the skin is absolutely normal over it. And if you feel a lipoma, it slips under your finger. You can't really grab hold of it. It keeps slipping out because it's fatty, okay? So they are mobile. They are slowly enlarging. Usually when a patient comes with this mass and you ask them how many years it's been there, they will tell you it's 10 or 15 years old. Okay, so looking at a mass which is like this, 10 or 15 years old, and the skin is absolutely normal, you will think it's a benign tumor. But there is one thing which you should ask the patient, is there any recent rapid growth of this lesion? Because lipomas are known to undergo malignancy, even though it's extremely rare. But the fact is, any long-standing benign tumor may undergo malignancy. So if a patient comes to you with a swelling like this, and they tell you it's been there for past 15 years, the question which you should ask them is, then why are you coming now? Or is it growing very rapidly? Or are you bothered of the cosmesis? Okay, so you have to know that reason from the patient. If the patient says that it's growing extremely rapidly, past 2 months I've noticed it's become much larger than usual, then you should think that it might have become malignant and you ask for a FNAC or a true cut biopsy to confirm them from the pathologist whether it's a malignant or a benign tumor, because the surgery for this will be different. If it's benign, it's a restricted surgery. If it's malignant, you have to give a very good margin around the tumor. Okay, so in a lipoma, usually complete excision is curative. And these are, when you look at them, this is how a lipoma looks like. You can see that it's a very well circumscribed mass, as if it's absolutely encapsulated. Okay, so this is quite a well circumscribed mass. It is soft, yellow, and it contains mature fat cells. There is absolutely no pleomorphism. However, liposarcoma is a malignant neoplasm of the adipocytes. So this, you can see, is at the waist of the patient. You can see it's a huge tumor, and because of the pressure effects on the skin has ulcerated and the tumor is actually becoming necrotic. It's coming out because the vascular supply is not adequate for it. This is what happens with rapidly enlarging tumors. When tumors are rapidly enlarging, the vessel proliferation cannot keep up with it. That's why you get areas of necrosis within the tumor. Okay, so this is a malignant neoplasm of adipocytes, appears in the older age group, 5th to 6th decade. And usually liposarcomas, if they are de novo, that means they are starting as a malignant lesion, they usually occur in the deep soft tissues, okay, or within the retroperitoneum. That is very, very common. or within the fat of the thigh, but deeper. Okay, so deep soft tissues or in visceral sites. Histologic subtype will determine the prognosis, and it can recur after excision. And the dangerous thing is it can go to grade 4 instantly, it can metastasize to the lungs. And on microscopy, you can see the difference. This is benign adipocytes. They look like just holes with a tiny dot there at the periphery. And these are malignant adipocytes, which have large nucleus with very hyperchromatic nucleus. Pleomorphism is there. And you can hardly see normal fat. Okay, these are a little bit normal looking, but not so good. Okay, and this is the gross. You can still see that it's yellowish, but here it has undergone a bit of necrosis as well. This is the bone marrow. This is a bone. Okay, and this is also the tumor. And once it becomes a little bit whitish like this, it means that it has become very cellular. When it's yellow, it means that there are lots of these holes, because this hole is filled with fat. H and E cannot stain fat, so that's why they look like holes and they look whitish. Okay, for fat stains, the fat stain is oil red O. Okay, so to demonstrate fat, we have to do a special stain. On H and E, fat is not seen, it is transparent. Okay, so once you see a tumor which is yellow like this, it means it contains a lot of fat. If the tumor changes color and becomes a bit whitish, it means that the fat has become so less, the nucleus has become so large, that's why it's losing the yellow color. So that was about soft tissue tumors. I just touched only on the lipoma part. The peripheral nervous system, here there are many types of peripheral neuropathies, which you may go through your book if you wish. This is just for general knowledge. But the thing which we are going to touch upon is just two of the nerve tumors which can come as short notes. Here, this is the peripheral nervous system. These are the motor units here. This is a normal motor unit. These are neurons. These are the axons, which are myelinated, and these are the neuromuscular junctions, okay, with the myocytes. These are skeletal muscle. So this is a normal motor unit. Now you look at this. This one, the neurons are completely normal. The myocytes are completely normal, but the myelin is defective in between, and it's getting remyelinated at the same time. So segmental demyelination, random internodes of myelin are injured and are remyelinated by multiple Schwann cells, while the axons and the myocytes remain intact. This is segmental demyelination. This is just for general knowledge. Axonal degeneration, here, if you look at this, compared with this is normal. The neuron is normal, myelin is normal, even the myocyte, which is innervated by this, is normal. However, you look at this is axonal degeneration. When the axon is degenerated, there is anti-retrograde degeneration, meaning to say that from the muscle towards the neuron. So here you can see that the muscles have become atrophied, the myocyte. Okay, and the myelin also is totally broken up and lost. So gradually, starting from the skeletal muscle, there is loss of skeletal muscle. Whatever left is totally atrophied. The myelin is also lost, and the neuron does not have any synapses anymore. Okay, so this is denervation, atrophy of the myocytes within its motor units. Now, this is important for you, neoplasms of the peripheral nervous system. There are only two tumors which we teach, that is schwannomas and neurofibromas, and each of them may come as a short note, or it may come as objective questions. Or nowadays in NEET, they give you pictures and they ask you questions on it. So schwannoma is a benign tumor which is arising from Schwann cells. Now the thing is, in schwannomas, it can cause local compression of the involved nerve. This is a very important sentence, because usually schwannomas arise, if there is a nerve, the schwannomas arise at the periphery of the nerve. So it sort of compresses the nerve. But neurofibroma, it engulfs the whole nerve. So it grows along the nerve. Okay, I'll show you pictures. Yeah, I hope you'll understand. Schwannomas very commonly occur at the cerebellopontine angle. It's attached to the vestibular branch of the 8th nerve within the brain, and it can cause symptoms like tinnitus and hearing loss, and that is known as an acoustic neuroma, which is a schwannoma, but it can happen as part of a syndrome of neurofibromatosis too. Okay, so there are syndromes like neurofibromatosis 1 and 2. in neurofibromatosis 2, there can be a schwannoma of the CP angle, and it can cause tinnitus and hearing loss, and these are known as acoustic neuromas. So schwannomas are benign, and they are well circumscribed, they are encapsulated. This is what I was trying to tell you, that they are attached to the nerve, but they can be separated from it. Whereas in neurofibroma, they sort of engulf the whole nerve. So to cut off the neurofibroma, you have to actually sacrifice the nerve. But in a schwannoma, when it occurs at the periphery, it can be separated from it. So schwannomas are firm gray masses, but they can have, if they grow large, they can have cystic change and xanthomatous changes. So this is a picture, I hope you can identify this. This is the cerebellum, which has been cut open. Okay, this is the cerebellum. This is the cerebellopontine angle. It's the pons here. This is the cerebellopontine angle, which is occupied by a huge encapsulated mass. Okay, so this is an acoustic neuroma or a schwannoma of the CP angle, and microscopically this is also extremely important because you have to identify a picture for it. So microscopically you have to remember three things: Antony A, Antony B, and Verroque bodies. So what is Antony A? Antony A is these areas in which you see pink and blue. They are elongated cellular zones. Okay. Antony B is these areas, which is the same thing, but as if you have poured, there's some myxoid change or a lot of dilution or something like that. So much less cellular, appearing a little bit myxoid or whitish. You can still see the spindle nuclei, which is the same here, but it's less cellular. So that is Antony B. Okay. So Antony A is cellular, elongated cell cytoplasm, whereas Antony B is a loose meshwork of the same cells with myxoid change. Okay, and the color difference is dark in here. Another thing which is extremely important, which is asked as objective question, is Verroque bodies. What is a Verroque body? These areas which are pinkish here, you can see that there is palisading of these nuclei here. Okay, so this palisading of nuclei on this side and that side, it leaves a nuclear-free zone. This pink nuclear-free zone is the Verroque body. The whole thing is not a Verroque body. This is a common mistake which is made by students. They say Verroque body is a nuclear-free zone surrounded by pseudopalisading. It's not that. Verroque body is the region between the areas of nuclear palisading. So this pink area is the Verroque body, not the pink plus this. Okay, so I hope there's no mistake in that. So schwannoma microscopy is extremely important. Antony B is the A is the cellular zone. Antony B is the hypocellular zone. Verroque body is the nuclear-free zone, which is between the nuclear palisaded areas. And another important thing is immunohistochemistry. Sometimes this characteristic microscopy is not there, and we do have a problem with diagnosing schwannoma versus some other tumors. So to confirm that it is of neural origin, we do something known as a S100 protein. S100 protein gives a very dark stain, confirming that it is a neural tumor. Now neurofibroma can be solitary. It can look exactly like a schwannoma, but it can also be multiple tiny lesions all over the skin. These are cutaneous neurofibromas. They may arise sporadically or may be associated with NF1. They may be large, they may become pedunculated, they can be plexiform. I'll show you a picture, you'll understand. And this is important. It is not possible to separate this lesion from the nerve. You have to sacrifice the nerve when you take out a neurofibroma, unlike a schwannoma. The risk of malignancy is very small, and this is the problem. Cosmetic is the problem. This is cutaneous neurofibromatosis. The whole skin is filled with these tiny neural tumors. And microscopically, if you see it, this is the skin, this is the subepidermal layer, which is quite clear, and then you see this tumor. Okay, and all neural tumors will be a bit spindle-like. These are solitary neurofibromas of the skin, and it may be large, pedunculated, and all this may be there on the skin. This is how it looks like grossly, and this is how it looks like microscopically. And I don't know whether in your NEET they may ask you shredded carrot appearance. That's why I have put this picture for you. These are loose spindle cells with shredded carrot appearance, and they might put this picture for you. You have to diagnose this as neurofibroma if they mention shredded carrot appearance. I don't know whether you can appreciate that. If you try shredding carrots at home, you will notice that one piece lies over the other, and that is what they want to explain here. Okay? Now that was about the peripheral nervous system. Now coming to the skin, there are only 3 skin tumors which are extremely important for you to know: the squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, and the malignant melanoma. So the most common is the squamous cell carcinoma. In Meghalaya, squamous cell carcinoma of the mucosa, not of the skin, is extremely common. The most common is esophageal squamous cell carcinoma, followed by the oral. Okay. Skin squamous cell carcinoma is actually quite rare in Meghalaya. We've seen 1 or 2, but not so much. It's usually the mucosal surfaces squamous cell carcinoma, which is very common. So, but here in the skin, squamous cell carcinoma occurs in sun-exposed areas, in older people, and there are so many predisposing factors, which I have already given the slides to you, so I think you can just go through this. The pathogenesis is UV light exposure and unrepaired DNA damage. Now, this is important because of a disease known as xeroderma pigmentosum. In this disease, there is DNA repair defect. So when there is DNA repair defect and the child goes to the ultraviolet, to play in the sun, and there is UV light exposure, so these children can develop squamous cell carcinoma at a very young age, and they may have multiple squamous cell carcinoma. That is the thing of xeroderma pigmentosum, which can come as an objective question again for you in NEET, maybe, because usually squamous cell carcinomas is in older people, and it's usually only in sun-exposed areas, and it's usually solitary. But in xeroderma pigmentosum, because of the defect in the DNA repair, so when the child is exposed to UV light, there can be development of squamous cell carcinomas at a very young age. They may be multiple squamous cell carcinomas, and they may be not in the sun-exposed areas. So that is the importance of this. Okay. So UVB, the ultraviolet light B, have a transient immunosuppressive effect on the skin by impairing the antigen presentation by Langerhans cells, weakening immunosurveillance because of this Langerhans cells. And squamous cell carcinoma can also occur because of human papillomavirus. High-risk HPV in cervical cancers can happen, but even skin tumors may occur because of HPV. And other genetic reasons are P53 mutations or mutations in RAS. So this is a clinical picture of a lesion here and in the ear. What you can appreciate here is there is some kind of ulceration, there is some kind of drying up, it looks like a wound, but what I want you to appreciate here is this. Arrow is pointing to a posterior cervical or post-auricular lymph node. Okay, so when a patient comes like this, from this lymph node, we will do an FNAC, and from this lesion, a biopsy. If you take a biopsy from this lesion, what you will appreciate is this is the stratified squamous epithelium, and you can see that right after that, from the basal layer, these cells seems to be proliferating and infiltrating down. So you have proof that these cells are arising from the squamous layer. Okay, and if we see deeper down that there are keratin pearls, these are nests of tumor cells, and there are keratin pearls, and the stroma is less with a little bit of inflammatory cells, we know for certain we are dealing with a squamous cell carcinoma. And FNAC from the lymph node can show us that there is the same squamous cells are there in the lymph node. That means this is a squamous cell carcinoma of the earlobe with metastasis to the posterior auricular lymph node. Now, basal cell carcinoma is most common human cancer. It's very slow growing. This is important because it is a carcinoma, but it is not like squamous cell carcinoma, in which squamous cell carcinoma, you can see, I showed you a picture with a lymph node metastasis. Squamous cell carcinoma can rapidly go into the lymph node. However, a basal cell carcinoma can remain it won't metastasize so early. Okay, so we call it a locally aggressive carcinoma. That is very, very important for you to understand the difference between squamous and basal cell carcinoma. So basal cell carcinoma, they are locally aggressive, they are slow growing, they rarely metastasize, and usually they're in sun-exposed areas in lightly pigmented people. it increases with immunosuppression. Again, there's inherited defect in DNA repair, and there can be association with syndromes like Gorlin syndrome. This is a picture of basal cell carcinoma. This is how it looks like. Okay, you can see that there are so many congested blood vessels. The skin is totally atrophied and shiny, and this is the stratified squamous epithelium. Unlike the squamous cell carcinoma, which I showed you the tumor cells directly arose from here. In basal cell carcinomas, we get they are basically the basal cells only, but they are islands of cells within the dermis. And what you can appreciate here is, I hope you can appreciate that if you look at this island, can you see that the periphery is sort of palisading? If you draw this, you will draw that the nuclei are palisading. You'll put dots in the center, but at the periphery, you will draw that they look like columnar and they are palisading. That is peripheral palisading, which is an extremely important point for you to remember for basal cell carcinoma. Another thing which I want you to appreciate is around all these islands, you can see a tiny free space. This is because of stromal retraction, which is an artifact. Okay, here this is the high power. You can see that there is peripheral palisading of the cells. Okay, and there is this artifactual stromal retraction, which gives it this halo around the islands. These are characteristic features of basal cell carcinoma, which you have to write down and identify microscopically if they give you a question and give you a picture like this to identify what's the diagnosis. Okay. Then malignant melanoma. This is less common, but it is deadlier than basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. Melanomas, these are some tumors which public awareness is important because they do occur in what we say moles or beauty spots. Okay, so when somebody has a mole on the face and it starts to itch, and they start to appreciate that the mole is either growing bigger and it's looking asymmetrical, a round mole may show some extension at some end, the borders may become irregular, the color may change, the diameter may become larger, and evolution means that there is basically an overall change in the existing nevus. Then these are earlier signs of skin melanomas, and they start to itch also. So this is very important. If public awareness is given, they can come to the hospital earlier and get surgically remove it so that it doesn't cause a malignant melanoma. Because melanomas are known to invade vertically, they go deep into the skin. Okay, unlike basal cell carcinomas. Basal cell carcinomas, they do not invade, that's why they don't go to the lymph nodes early. But malignant melanomas invade very rapidly and they go rapidly to the lymph nodes too. So melanomas can occur in pre-existing nevi, or there can be hereditary predisposition. And this is important, a radial growth phase and a vertical growth phase. I'll show you pictures. And the probability of metastasis is dependent on the depth of invasion and sentinel node. There are pictures, I'll explain it to you. So this is what we mean. This is the existing nevi, but if you can see that the pigmentation is sort of coming out of it and it's becoming, the borders are very irregular. Okay, the color is also changing. Here it's very black, here it's a little bit lighter, here it's almost yellowish. The diameter of the lesion was originally here, but now it has extended. So all these are signs of malignancy, which can be taught to the public to be aware that these signs can be dangerous and to report. So now when you look at this picture, this is the epidermis and this is the dermis. You can see that this is the nevi, the dark area, the melanoma. If it undergoes malignancy, it tends to go down and infiltrate. These blue dots are the cells, and they infiltrate very rapidly vertically. This is known as the vertical face of the tumor. At the same time, initially it may be here, but then these cells spread out horizontally. That is the radial face of the tumor. So basically, malignant melanomas can have a radial growth phase, that is horizontal, or a vertical growth phase. Okay, so the same thing here, which we can show you, that they start here at the melanocytes level, which is in the basal cell layer, and they rapidly proliferate and drop off cells. Okay, and this is known as the vertical growth phase. So here you can see that they can infiltrate into the blood vessel. Can you appreciate this? Okay, so they come down, okay, and they can infiltrate into the blood vessel, and that's how they undergo metastasis. Melanomas can go to the lymph nodes rapidly, and they can also enter the blood vessel and go to other organs rapidly. That is the danger of melanoma. This is how histopathologically it looks like. This is a stratified squamous epithelium, and these are the cells which are the melanocytes. And here they have formed islands of proliferating cells. Here you can see this is an abnormal mitotic figure here. Sometimes these melanomas, because they are basically melanocytes, they may produce a lot of melanin, that is the brown pigment here. Okay, so this is the stratified squamous epithelium, this is the melanocyte with the melanin pigment, and these are the melanocytes which have proliferated into islands with the pigment in between. So when there is pigment, it is quite easy for the pathologist to say that this is malignant melanoma. And if it is like this, it is quite easy for the clinician also to say that this is probably a malignant melanoma, because it is really large, asymmetric, different areas. There is ulceration, there is different colors. Okay, so clinically this is easy, and microscopically this is easy. The problem is if the tumor does not produce any pigment, which is known as amelanotic melanoma. In that case, we have to do immunohistochemistry, and the most important marker which can come as an objective for you is the most important marker for melanoma is HMB45. So HMB45 is very important. It is diagnostic for malignant melanoma. Okay, even S100 can be used, but S100 is not so specific. Now, this is, I wish you were there with me in the class. I would have asked you a question on this. This you can all identify that this is the brain. Can anybody type in the chat box what is the possible diagnosis here? You can see that this is the brain, and there are multiple lesions. And if you notice, these lesions are, this is the gray zone, this is the white zone, and these lesions are mostly at the gray-white zone. And multiple lesions all over the brain, blackish pigmented lesions. So what is the possible diagnosis here? If anybody can enter in the chat box, I'll give you 20 seconds time. Correlate the malignant melanoma and correlate the aggressiveness of the tumor. It can enter hematogenously and go and metastasize. So what is the diagnosis here? This is a metastasis from a malignant melanoma of the skin to the brain. Okay, nobody's chatting, so I don't even know whether you listened to the whole class. This slide is not moving. Okay, these are there. You can do these in your that PPT which I have sent you. These are nothing new. Now about rosettes, this is important. Again, it can come as an objective question. So these are different types of rosettes which can be seen in brain tumors. Flexner-Wintersteiner rosette is a true rosette, and these are seen in retinoblastoma ependymomas. Then this is also another rosette with this ependymoblastomas. This is Homeroid rosettes. All these are actually true rosettes. When the cells are arranged around a vessel, they are known as pseudo-rosettes. So this ependymomas have perivascular rosettes, which are pseudo-rosettes, and astroblastomas also have perivascular rosettes, which are known as pseudo-rosettes. Okay, so I've completed all my classes, and I've put this in your assignment. You please send all your assignments today so that I can give attendance to everybody. By today, everybody should submit their assignments. Okay? Thank you.